All right, welcome back. Our next one is going to be feudal system. The feudal system, the feudal system is a political organizational system. So it is a way that a government is organized. And it was this idea of how to organize a government is very old, but it was originally brought to England from Normandy, France, and it's a part in the northwest part of France, very close to England, and it was brought in the year 1066 A.D. So feudalism, as the feudal system is also called, feudalism has been used in France by the Normans from the time they first settled there in about 900 AD. So when the Normans came there, they brought this system with them. They invaded Normandy. They were Vikings. They were Vikings that invaded Normandy. They took it from the French, and then they kind of became French. And they incorporated that system there. William the Conqueror of France, he was a Norman who happened to have some Viking heritage in him. He invaded England in the year 1066. He used this organizational system to rule over his brand new country of England. The feudal system was declining during the 1600s, but parts of it do remain today, although not with any real authority. England still has a king, currently a queen, the Queen of England. And when she eventually passes away, she will be succeeded by I believe, her oldest son, and he will become the new king of England. So England still has a king and queen, and many of its hereditary titles still exist, which we're about to go through, though they do not have the same power that they used to. So this first section right here, all of these titles, king, duke, marquess, earls, counts also, the same thing, barons or knights, they're all part of the nobility. They're all part of the nobility, and anyone who would be considered a common person, or even below that, a slave, would call anyone up here, they would call them Lord. So anyone down here would call any one of these guys, or ladies, my Lord or my Lady. So the king had ultimate power and authority. They were the holders of ultimate power and authority, and they were the king, and no one was allowed to be disloyal to the king. The king had rights over all the land of the country. They basically owned the entire country and everything in it. All of those with titles below the king had to swear an oath of allegiance to the king. If you wanted to have one of these titles below the king, you had to pledge to your death that you would stay loyal to the king and do what they said. So the monarch, which a king or a queen is a monarch, is the only one capable of awarding titles of nobility. You can't have one unless the king gave it to you or your parents, and you got it from your parents. So a duke is a very rare title. There's not very many dukes. Normally, only very close relatives of the king were provided this royal title. Very few dukes. The only people more powerful than the dukes? The king. A marquess. This is also spelled marquis. That's more of a French spelling, and it's going to be important that you know marquis and marquess are about the same thing, because eventually when we get to the Revolutionary War in Unit 3, the Marquis de Lafayette is a very important figure. He's one of the most powerful people in the Revolutionary War under George Washington. So a marquess, what were they? They were given large portions of land by the king at the edge of the kingdom. It was their job to protect the dangerous, faraway parts of the kingdom. You would normally find a marquess or a marquis the edge of a kingdom, fighting to protect the borders. An earl or a count. They were also very close known or relatives of the king. So you had to be a really good buddy of the king, or you had to be related to them. And they served as a type of governor. So the king would say, I'm going to give a huge piece of this land to an earl or a count, and they will rule it for me. Because they didn't have technology back then, so they would to a pyramid of authority. But a baron, these were the protectors of the manors. So the large land estates, an earl or a count would be in charge of the barons, and the barons would be in charge of the merchants and the common people. They were protectors of the manors, the larger estates, and were owners of some castles. Obviously, if they've got castles, the people above them, they've got castles too. And the ones above them probably have better castles. They were the lords that directed, they were in charge of the local knights and peasants. That's these guys down here. This title, baron, and those above it were passed down from generation to generation. Now, a baron is considered the lowest and most common of the hereditary titles. So if you ran into somebody you were going to call them lord, most likely they were going to be a baron. Some knights, that's the one right below this, would hold their hereditary title, but most knights were knighted by somebody above them. So a knight, we've all heard of what a knight is. These were the warriors of the kingdom. Each knight was offered a section of a baron's land, so it's less and less land, so that way they could have more and more direct control over that land. So the king controls the tiny little people, the normal people, by giving some of his authority to a duke, duke to an earl or count, earl or count to a baron, barons to knights. Knights, they're the ones with the actual swords doing the bidding of those above them. This was done only after taking a royal oath to serve the king for their entire lifetime, and they had to be faithful while doing it. Many knights would also serve a lower lord, such as a duke or an earl, but their ultimate allegiance was to the king, because remember, the only person who can give one of these titles is the king. So when you swear that loyalty, when you get that title, you're getting it from the king. That's how they kept control over all this. And then, it's hereditary. These titles are hereditary. They're passing these down by saying, well, I was made a duke by the king. When I die, my son will be made a duke, or a duchess, if my oldest child was a daughter. And I would say, so that's passed down by blood. Well, what happened to your second oldest kid, or your third, or your fourth? Did they get anything? No. No title. Everything goes to the oldest. To be a knight, you had to be of noble birth. So many knights would be the second, third, fourth, fifth sons of these people. Although most children of a king would not be a knight, not an actual combat knight. They might have the title, but they weren't really going to fight. Most fighters, most knights would have come from the second, third, fourth, fifth kids of these people. Because they couldn't be anything else, they could at least become a knight. People that were common could become what's known as a squire, which serve the knights and sometimes even fight alongside the knights, and they train to be knights, but the only squires that could actually become a knight were the children of these people, but mostly this group. All right, so what about the non-nobility, the common people? Well, the wealthiest and best off were the merchants. Now, these were free people. They were the business people in the country. They did not hold any extra authority over those below them, but they did have money. Okay, the villains, or the serfs. Most people hear about them and they hear them called peasants. That's the most common term for them. Now, peasants, they worked for the landlords in return for wages. They got paid a little bit. But it might not be in money. It might be in permission to live here, kind of thing. They were not slaves, but they had nothing that was not given to them from their local lord. So if you're a peasant and you get everything from the local knight, They're the one who actually owns it, although they got it from a baron, and the baron got it from an earl, and the earl got it from a duke, and honestly, the duke got it from the king. So your loyalty is to who? The king. Um, this population was the largest in the feudal system. Most people were peasants. If you were born back then, chances are you're a peasant. And people who were not even considered common people, they were lower than the serfs, lower than the peasants, people who didn't even really have money, were the slaves. The slaves are the lowest category in the feudal system of England, and that is of slaves. These people were owned by the higher class people. So anybody higher up could have a slave. Although, realistically, if you don't have any money, are you going to own slaves? Probably not. Merchants could own slaves. They had some money. Most slaves would have, however, been owned by this group. Slaves had no rights. They were property. They were not necessarily considered people. So hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.